जिंदा रहे, जिंदा रहे, जिंदा रहे। आए आज़ादारे हुसैनी, ये चलन जिंदा रहे, जिंदा रहे।
In today's program, we will explore Damascus back to their homes in Medina.
जब रिहाई का हुक्म मिल गया है तो सरकार हज़रत ज़ैनब उलिया मकाम ने इस ख्वाहिश का इजहार किया था कि हमने अभी तक भाई की अज़ा नहीं की है, अगर इजाज़त हो जाए हम आज़ादारी कर लें।
Lady Zainab first wanted to perform Azadari in Damascus before leaving for Karbala.
तो ये आज़ादारी जनाब हज़रत ज़ैनब कुबरा सलामुल्लाह अलैहा की है कि आपकी ख्वाहिश को जो है मान लिया गया, जगह दी गई और जनाब हज़रत ज़ैनब कुबरा सलामुल्लाह अलैहा ने दिल भर करके वहाँ शाम में आज़ादारी की है।
The family of Imam Hussein prepared for Azadari. The tragedy of Karbala in its entirety is heart-wrenching, but some events were so horrific, many family members were unable to express themselves, as they were filled with grief and pain. This preparation is such an example.
उस घर को स्याहपोश कर दिया गया, ख़ुद जितने असीर थे बैठे, वहाँ शाम की अच्छी खासी ख़वातीन भी आईं और ज़िक्र होने लगा और उसमें जो है लूटे हुए सामान को वापस किया जाने लगा। वह सामान आता गया, ज़ाहिर हर सामान के साथ जो है कोई न कोई एक गम वाबस्ता है, कोई न कोई एक जो है एक तारीख़ वाबस्ता है। अब तारीख़ का बिल्कुल सामने का वाक़या वाबस्ता है। फ़र्ज़ कीजिए कि अगर एक छोटी सी रिदा छीनी हुई आ रही है जनाब सकीना की अगर है तो उससे बहुत ही बड़ा गम का वाक़या मंसूब है। खाली देख करके जो है रोना और ख़ुसूसियत के साथ सरों का आना, ज़ाहिर सर ले गए तो सरों का आना, ये तो ख़ुद सामने ही का वाक़या है। किसी माँ के लिए और किसी रिश्तेदार के लिए जैसे सामने कटा हुआ सर आए तो उसके लिए किसी बयान की ज़रूरत नहीं, खाली वो ख़ुद आना ही जो है यकीनन एक बहुत बड़ा मरहला है। उसको बर्दाश्त करना और उस पर अपने आंसुओं को पी जाना ये मुमकिन ही नहीं है।
When Yazid eventually returned the belongings that had been looted during the Battle of Karbala back to the remaining members of Imam Hussein's family, they included the heads of the martyrs.
में जनाब हज़रत अली अकबर का जब सर आया है तो उसमें जो शाम की ख़वातीन थीं उस सर को देख करके बाज़ ख़ातून ने ये बात कही कि काश कि जब इस जवान को शहीद किया गया तो उसकी माँ न रही हो, इसलिए कि इतना हसीन इतना जवान माँ ने कैसे बर्दाश्त किया होगा।
طاح من فوق المهر وبهامته مطبر، لن طاح من فوق المهر وبهامته مطبر.
After the lamentation in Damascus, the caravan's next stop was Karbala. It should be noted here that the date of this journey is unclear. One group of historians claim that the captives were imprisoned in Yazid's dungeons for an entire year, while other historians claim that they were imprisoned for a few weeks. Salah Sherestani explains in his book that when Lady Zainab and the other captives reached Karbala, the sand of Karbala was soaked with fresh blood, which suggests that they returned within the same year of the event itself. Nevertheless, the caravan of captives reached Karbala on the 20th of Safar, which is popularly known as Arba'in. Arba'een marks the 40th day after the martyrdom of Imam Hussein on the 10th of Muharram. Upon Lady Zainab's arrival, authors state that she witnessed people mourning and lamenting the death of Imam Hussein, his family and companions. Among those who were mourning were the companions of the Holy Prophet, such as Jabir ibn Abdullah Ansari and other members of Bani Hashim who had travelled from Medina. It is said that both caravans, the family of Imam Hussein and the friends from Medina, mourned in Karbala for 3 days. It was during these 3 days the intensity of mourning reached new heights, understandably so, as it was the first time that the women of Karbala had returned to the site of their Imam's martyrdom. This emotional intensity was further compounded by the death of Ruqayya bint Hussein, who died upon seeing her father's severed head. She was only 3 or 4 years old. The women of Karbala were deeply distressed that they had returned to Karbala without Ruqayya, who had died during her imprisonment. Historians recount that Ruqayya used to weep the whole night as she could not sleep without her father and always asked where he was. When Yazid came to know that the daughter of Imam Hussein couldn't sleep and constantly asked after her father, Yazid sent the head of Imam Hussein to Ruqayya. When she received her father's head, she didn't recognize him at first, as his head was covered in blood and dust. After a few seconds, when she realized whose head had been placed on her lap, she screamed, wept and beat her face. She couldn't believe that the followers of her great-grandfather Rasulullah would behead her father. Historians explain that night was the hardest for Lady Zainab and Imam Sajjad, as neither could bear the grief of little Ruqayya. In many eulogies, it is said that Ruqayya placed her head on her father's severed head and fell asleep, and that she never woke up again.
And she cries at night, calling for Imam Hussain Islam. Some reports say that the ladies had told her that he has gone for Hajj, not to mention to her that he has been brutally killed. So the older daughters knew that he had been killed, and the 3.5-year-old, they would just say to her that he's gone for a pilgrimage or something. And when at night Yazid hears that she's crying, he says, I can't sleep, what's wrong? So they say that there is a little girl crying for her father. Who's her father? He says. It's Hussein. So he says, okay, give her the head of Hussein. So there are accounts where the head has been brought to the prison. And when the little girl sees the head, she can't bear the pain, and she says, oh father, when you left the tents, your veins, your neck was not slit. And so she holds the head and she cries and she drops on the floor and she dies instantly.
Ruqayya's death was a huge loss for Lady Zainab. Upon her return to Medina, she could not find the courage to face Ruqayya's sister, Fatima Soghara. Despite having been shaken to the core by the horror of everything that she had witnessed, Lady Zainab continued her struggle after Karbala.
लेकिन उसके बाद जब आप पलट करके वापस आई हैं मदीने, तो आपने इसी को अपना वतीरा बना लिया, अपनी ज़िंदगी का हिस्सा बना लिया। उसकी कैफियत ज़ाहिर ये तो नहीं कि कहीं जाके कहा जाए कि हमारे घर में मजलिस होने वाली है, आप लोग आइएगा। या हम आप अपने ज़माने में कर रहे हैं, लेकिन जनाबे ज़ैनब कुबरा सलामुल्लाह अलैहा कोई मौका मिल जाए करबला को बयान करना, कहीं चार अफराद जमा हो जाएं या आप जमा कर लें, वाक़या करबला को बयान करना।
Bibi Zainab started this Majlis Aza or Azadari, or process of disclosing the oppressors from the exact day of Ashura. She started to explain to people wherever she was taken, from Kufa to Sham, wherever they were taken, she used to find an excuse to explain who she were and who Imam Hussein was, and who are the people who have killed Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam.
As a result of her continuous outspoken sermons against what the Umayyads had done to her brother, she was often asked to leave places and sometimes even forced.
आपको मदीना छोड़ना नहीं पड़ा था, आपने मदीना छोड़ा नहीं था। यानी जालिम ने आज़ाद कर देने के बाद भी जब ये देखा कि अगर इसी तरीक़े से ये चलता रहा कारोबार, यानी इसी तरीके से वाक़े करबला को बयान करते रहे, तो लोग सभी जाग जाएंगे और सभी हमारे जुल्म की तरफ मुतवज्जो हो जाएंगे, फिर हमारे लिए ज़िंदगी दूभर सी हो जाएगी, हम नहीं रह सकते हैं।
She continued this mission after the tragedy of Karbala, and when she came back to Medina, she was constantly bothered by the rulers of the time, because she wouldn't remain silent. She used to continue to speak. She used to continue to talk about the tragedy of Karbala, and people used to gather around Bibi Zainab Salatullah Alaiha, and they didn't like her expressions and disclosures against the corrupt rulers of the time.
Nevertheless, the entire tradition of Azadari can be attributed to the legacy of a Lady Zainab.
Had it not been for Hazrat Zainab Salam Alaiha and Imam Sajjad Alayhi Salam, we wouldn't have Azadari. What we have today, its roots are in the practice of Hazrat Zainab Kubra Salam Alaiha and Imam Sajjad Alayhi Salam. I mean, those two were the two personalities who laid the foundations of the present day Azadari, I would say. Had it not been for them, there would be no grief, or there wouldn't be a true understanding of the grief for Imam Hussain Islam and the passion and lamentation. None of those would exist today.
The inception of Azadari began in Damascus at the request of Lady Zainab. This event was crucial in paving the way for the development of the commemoration of Ashura by the Muslim Ummah. It has become a means for followers to show their solidarity with the sufferings of Imam Hussein and to share their pain with the Holy Prophet and his daughter, Fatima Zahra. Many people have assumed that the intensity of Azadari would decrease with the passage of time, but on the contrary, the opposite has happened. Azadari has survived and is commemorated with more passion each year. In every era, the followers of Imam Hussein have faced numerous difficulties in remembering and mourning their Imam. They have faced torture, harassment, imprisonment, and in many cases even death. Similarly, despite the Imam's unique spiritual and moral status, they were also stopped and punished for remembering the martyrs of Karbala in both the Umayyad and Abbasid eras.
Look, Azadari evolved as the earlier centuries. The Shias were in Taqiyya, the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam could not openly hold majalis for Imam Hussain alayhi salam. So, even the early Shias could not hold majalis or gatherings for remembering the grief of Karbala when Ashura came. We do have accounts where the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, the Imams, were grieved when Ashura came, or when Muharram started. They would not smile, they would not laugh. They did not laugh, but they wouldn't even smile. But over the time, they could not hold majalis. They were not free to hold majalis in the times of Banu Umayyah, and then later on Bani Abbas did not allow it to happen.
The practices and customs associated with Azadari, such as wearing black for example, can be linked back to the Imams who also did the same.
So Azadari was initially established by Bibi Zainab and Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salatu wasalam, and that tradition was followed by Imam Muhammad Baqir and other Imams. And the way they used to do it, they used to, as soon as Muharram used to arrive, they used to start wearing black or express their sorrow and sadness in the tragedy of Karbala, and they used to gather people around. And even they used to pay the poets and orators to compose poems and give lectures about Imam Hussain and read the Maqtal, the Shahadat of Imam Hussain. And so this Sunnah and tradition was established by infallibles and Ma'asumin alayhi salatu wasalam.
Imam Zain al-Abidin was one of the few people who witnessed the massacre at Karbala. He diligently conveyed the details of this tragedy to the followers of the Ahl al-Bayt and the generations that succeeded them. Imam Zain al-Abidin had wanted to fight alongside his father Imam Hussain, but his illness did not allow him to do so. The only adult male who survived Ashura couldn't even stand, so much so that his aunt Lady Zainab had to rescue him from the burning tents, carrying him in her arms to safety. Yazid's commanders predicted that the Imam's health would deteriorate and that eventually he would lose the battle for his own life. It is for this reason they did not kill him and instead took him as a prisoner along with the women and children. Imam Zain al-Abidin is famous for grieving for 40 years after Ashura. He was often seen weeping, lost within his haunting memories of Karbala.
Imam Zain al-Abidin, when he arrived in Medina, he used to look for an excuse to explain the tragedy of Karbala. For example, if he used to see an animal is being slaughtered, he would go and ask, "Have you given water to the animal?" They would say yes. And then he would say, "My father was killed without giving water in the plains of Karbala." And then he used to explain the tragedy of Karbala to them.
Followers of the Imam narrated that he often left his food in the middle of a meal, tears flowing from his eyes. He couldn't stop weeping for his father and brothers.
इमाम ज़ैनुल ने मुख्तलिफ़ तरीक़े से हत्ता कि उस पानी को वज़ू के लिए जो आया है, वज़ू कर रहे हैं या वज़ू के लिए जैसे ही देखा रोने लगना। रवायात में इस तरह से भी है कि इस कदर रोए हैं कि आपका आंसू इतना ज़्यादा कि वो खुद बहने लगे।
The tragedy of Karbala is full of heartbreaking stories, including the torture of Imam Hussain, the denial of water to his family and companions, and the barbaric way in which they were killed. Scaling new heights of brutality, Imam Zain al-Abidin couldn't control his emotions and would begin crying. This was especially the case whenever he used to see anyone being mistreated, even animals.
एक खाली जो ये देख रहे हैं कि एक कसाब जानवर को लेके जा रहा है ज़बह करने के लिए, पूछ लेना पानी पिला लिया है? हाँ, ये हुक्म शरीयत है, हमने पानी पिला लिया है, वो शरीयत है। उस पर फ़ौरन कह देना कि है मेरा बाबा प्यासा, शहीद किया गया है।
One day his servant, witnessing this, asked Imam Zain al-Abidin, "O son of Rasulullah, when will this grief end?" The Imam replied with tears and recalled the incident of Prophet Yaqub and Prophet Yusuf. He said that although he had 12 sons and temporarily lost one, Prophet Yaqub wept with such intensity that he lost his eyesight. Although Prophet Yaqub knew that Prophet Yusuf was alive and simply missing, Prophet Yaqub couldn't control himself and used to weep a lot. In comparison, Imam Zain al-Abidin had lost his father, brothers, uncles, and cousins, totaling a number of 17 members of his family in one single day. He had witnessed Yazid ibn Muawiyah's forces humiliating the bodies of the Ahl al-Bayt, burning the camps, and also witnessed the death of his youngest sister, who died in front of him in Yazid's dark prison. How could this grief end?
जनाब मिनहाल से जो आपके ज़माने के बहुत अच्छे आपके सहाबियों में से हैं, आखिर की इस कैफियत देखी जब कुछ कतरात बहते हुए देखे, पूछा कि भाई अपना दामन बचाने लगे, पता नहीं कैसा पानी है। तो कहा नहीं, आप दामन बचा रहे हैं, ये आपके आका इमाम के आंसू हैं, रोए हुए आंसू हैं। ज़ाहिर दिल भर आएगा, दिल भरेगा। अब कैसे तसल्ली दें, कैसे क्या कहें। तो आगे इतने कहते कि आखिर आप कब तक रोइएंगे, कितना रोएंगे, कब तक रोएंगे। तसल्ली सिर्फ एक ही लफ्ज़, शहादत तो आपके घर के मीरास है, शहादत तो आपके घर की मीरास है। उस पर जनाब सीधे सज्जाद ने बात कही, शहादत मीरास है, लेकिन माँ बहनों का बेपर्दा होना मीरास नहीं है।
Grieving and lamentation for Karbala became an essential part of Imam Zain al-Abidin's life. His son Imam Baqir and then later his grandson Imam Jafar al-Sadiq have both said that there was not a single day when Imam Zain al-Abidin did not weep for his father, brothers, uncles and sister. Imam Baqir was born on 57th Hijri, which means he was 4 years old when the tragedy of Karbala took place. This whole ordeal for such a young child must have been very traumatic. In Bahar al-Anwar, there are traditions related to Imam Baqir which states that he used to mourn the killing of his grandfather Imam Hussein.
पांचवें इमाम हज़रत इमाम मोहम्मद बाक़िर सलाम के लिए कि आपने वसीयत की है। 800 दिरहम का तज़किरा है कि 800 दिरहम जो है आपने ख़ुसूसियत के साथ जो है छोड़ा था, और उसके बाद वसीयत की कि मेरे बाद जो है मैदान मिना में कुछ साल मुअय्यन करके इतने साल तक हज के ज़माने मैदान मिना में जो है आज़ादारी की जाए, आज़ादारी की जाए। ये भी इसमें एक मसलहत थी, वो आज़ादारी जो पहुंच जाए सब तक आज़ादारी पहुंचे, इसलिए कि मिना वो जगह का नाम है जहां हर जगह के लोग होंगे, हर जगह के लोग होंगे, और वहाँ ख़ैमे की ज़िंदगी होगी। जैसे करबला में ख़ैमे थे, वहाँ उन हालात में बयान करना और मुअस्सिर होगा, असरअंदाज होगा ख़ैमे में। और हकीकी मानो में उन ख़ैमों में हर ख़ैमे के पास पानी रखे होते हैं, और जिसको प्यास होती है खुला मैदान, उसमें धूप, वहाँ पानी होता है। याद दिलाना कि इसी में जो है प्यासे बच्चे कैसे प्यास से तड़प रहे थे। यानी तरीक़े निकाले हैं कि ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा जो है इसके असरात मुरत्तब हो जाएं।
Even though Imam Baqir was a young child of 4 during the Battle of Karbala, he couldn't forget what he had witnessed. He used to recall the miseries of the martyrs.
We have accounts where Imam Baqir was asked and he would report certain masa'ib, what happened to them.
Imam Baqir had lived under the oppressive rule of the Umayyads, but kept the practice of Azadari alive in his home and encouraged his followers to do the same. Imam Baqir's son, Imam Jafar Sadiq, was the 6th Imam and a highly influential figure in the history of Islam. He laid down the foundations of Shia fiqh, and his works and contributions on Islamic jurisprudence have influenced all major schools of Islam. Many historians claim that Imam Jafar Sadiq inherited his wisdom and knowledge from the gate of knowledge himself, Imam Ali. Imam Jafar Sadiq witnessed the oppressive rule of the Umayyad and the Abbasid dynasties and had been the victim of harassment, torture and political victimization. When the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads, the Imam was given some respite to do Azadari more freely, whilst the Abbasids struggled to consolidate their central leadership. This brief transition helped the Imam to further formalize Azadari. He used to summon people and ask them to recite poetry and eulogies about Imam Hussein and the martyrs of Karbala.
When the time of Imam Sadiq came, then they had a person recite poetry like we have today in the Arabs and the Iranians and the subcontinent of India and Pakistan and other countries, where we hold majalis where people in poetry read what happened in Karbala, or the sad part, which we may name different things like Marsi or whatever. That was in the time of the sixth Imam Islam.
Whenever he used to gather people for recitation, he always made sure that his family members were present.
छठे इमाम खुसूसियत के साथ जो है आप लोगों को जमा करते थे। उनके ज़माने में मरसिया पढ़ने वाले थे, खाली मिलने के लिए आ गए थे। मिलने एक मरसिया पढ़ने वाले थे, मेरे जहन से नाम इस वक्त निकल गया, लेकिन है कि मिलने के लिए आ गए थे इमाम से। और जैसे ही देखा, अरे ये तो मरसिया पढ़ते हैं, अरे तुम मरसिया पढ़ते हो, मेरा जी चाहता है कि मरसिया पढ़ो। आपने फरशदा बिछा दिया। खुसूसियत से घर वाली जितनी ख़वातीन थी, उनसे कहा कि ख़वातीन को हमने अलग से इंतज़ाम कर दिया, उनको बुलाया जाए। ख़वातीन आकर के बैठे और मरसिया पढ़ा, इमाम निगरिया किया, ख़वातीन निगरिया किया। अरे हर इमाम ने इसकी यकीनन हर ज़माने में बड़ा एहतमाम किया, अमली तौर से और कौल के शक्ल में दूसरों तक पहुँचाया, जो आज तक हमारे लिए है।
As soon as the voice of the reciter reached his ears, he would begin crying and would continue doing so for hours. It is also said that if one took the name of Imam Hussein, people would never see Imam Jafar Sadiq laughing thereafter. Imam Jafar Sadiq also explains to his followers the spiritual and divine rewards for those who mourn Imam Hussein. There are many sayings of his in which he categorically outlines that those who weep for Imam Hussein will receive endless rewards. During Imam Jafar Sadiq's imamat, we come to learn that he augmented the process of bringing groups of people together from different places and backgrounds in one place and asked them to recite poetry and eulogies about Imam Hussein and other martyrs of Karbala. This collective act of Azadari would soon expand and transform into an organized process in centuries to come. Seventh Imam, Musa al-Kadhim, suffered greatly at the hands of the Abbasid dynasty. He was mostly imprisoned, sent into exile, and kept under strict surveillance. Abbasid rulers were politically insecure as they struggled to gain legitimacy in the presence of the Ahl al-Bayt. He was imprisoned on many occasions. One account suggests for up to 14 years. Historians have argued that the reason for his death was poison rather than a natural one. Nevertheless, despite the heavy restrictions placed on his freedom, it is said that when the Muharram moon was sighted, people never found him with a smiling face. Instead, his eyes were full of tears and his heart filled with sorrow. Imam Rida, the eighth Imam, was an influential figure who could be described as a jurist, theologian, and one of the best intellectual individuals of his time. Imam Rida often used to narrate that if one wants to weep for anything, he or she should weep for Imam Hussein. He used to conduct majlis gatherings in the days of Muharram and called poets and reciters to attend them. He also said that whoever abandons his needs and desires on the day of Ashura, Allah would fulfill his needs as a reward. Azadari under the 9th, 10th and the 11th Imam Imam Muhammad al-Jawad, Ali al-Hadi and Hassan al-Askari respectively had undergone a mix of scenarios. Sometimes the Imams were allowed to mourn, but most of the time they were barred from mourning as their popularity represented a tangible threat to the Abbasid rule. Despite the dangers and obstacles, important eulogies of the martyrs were composed during the Umayyad period and during the first 2 centuries of the Abbasid rule. In what follows, we look at how Azadari survived and evolved after the 11 Imams.
يا روحي المشتاقة لشوفته روحي نوع الموت حسين زيارته.
During the presence of the Imams, majalis and visiting the shrines of the martyrs of Karbala became a frequent and widely spread phenomenon. The major shift that occurred during this period is the transformation of Azadari into a more collective and broader concept. Now it wasn't only about mourning anymore, it became a kind of protest, a protest against unjust rulers. The oppressed and the helpless now had their own language, through which they could express their own personal grief and pain. This was the beginning of a new and powerful form of Azadari. In 934 AD, during the Buyid dynasty, Imad al-Dawla, also known as Ali ibn Buya, formed the Buyid dynasty and made Shiraz its capital after capturing Fars. Buyid was a Persian Shia dynasty and stretched to the northern lands of modern Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkey, the UAE and Oman. Kamran Scott Agai, in his book The Women of Karbala, explains it was the Buyid dynasty which initiated the commemoration of Ashura, thus establishing state patronage of the tragedy of Karbala. This state patronage included a public holiday beginning in 963 AD.
In the Buyid era, because it was a Shi'i dynasty, I'm not saying they necessarily 100% promoted Shi'ism, but they were Shi'i, so there was tolerance of Shi'ism. So it does seem like in that era, that's when public commemorations of Ashura and Muharram became more open. That could simply be on one level because there was the absence of persecution, that you're not going to get killed or imprisoned or tortured for having a public procession, for example, for mourning Imam Hussein. Some sources do indicate that they themselves also sponsored or encouraged Shi'i-specific holidays, if you will, such as Ghadir Khom as a holiday, Muharram commemorations. It said in one source that they closed the markets of Baghdad and draped black cloth over them, and men and women were having a mourning procession.
The Buyid dynasty provided huge relief for the mourners of Imam Hussein. Now they did not have to hide or secretly perform Azadari. They were given permission with state backing. It was during this era that Azadari spread to every corner and through the streets of the Buyid dynasty. The dynasty instructed that shops should be closed on the day of Ashura and water stations should be set up along the route of the procession. It is also said that the wearing of black clothes in Muharram was formally decreed during the Buyid dynasty. This dynasty was also known for their public celebration of Ghadir, an important date in the Jafri school of thought, in which Prophet Muhammad proclaimed Imam Ali as his successor. In short, during the Buyid dynasty, Azadari was encouraged on the streets, when followers of the Ahl al-Bayt experienced greater religious freedom and a new culture of mourning arose with official decree. The fall of the Buyid dynasty made things worse for Muslims once again. The invasions of the Seljuks and their support for Abbasid oppressions against Shias made things very difficult for the followers of the Ahl al-Bayt. Until the emergence of the Safavid Empire, Shias struggled for religious freedom and remained under the ever-watchful eye of their oppressive rulers. The Safavid dynasty rose to power in 1501 AD and controlled territories stretching from modern Iran, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Armenia, Georgia, Iraq, Kuwait, and Afghanistan to some parts of Turkey, Syria, Pakistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Shah Ismail founded the Safavid dynasty, and he decided to make the Jafri school of thought the state religion. The Safavid dynasty built the shrines of the Ahl al-Bayt, supported pilgrims, and funded scholars to expand Muslim literature. Recounting and mourning Karbala became a popular ritual in the Safavid era.
Of course, many people will look to the Safavid era as another jump to the establishment of some of the institutions there are today among Shi'is. But there are certain specific things that are done in Iran, like the type of theatrical enactments are said to have been more institutionalized and sponsored during the Safavid era. So although there's some evidence it went on before and in different regions, what was done later on appears to have been developed in that time. There's certain texts you hear in Farsi, they were developed over time, certain styles of recitation. So it appears, if you will, some local flavor was put in during the Safavid era, but these things were done before the Safavid era too. It's just there was some adjustment, and one can say doing these things on a broader scale in society.
The fast development of the Jafri theology and literature made a huge impact in the region, specifically in the Indian subcontinent. The Qutb Shahi dynasty, who ruled parts of the Deccan from 1518 till 1687, performed Muharram rituals which then spread into different segments of society. During this time, most of the villagers were observing Muharram with great zeal. The most interesting and unique element of Azadari in South Asia is its diversity. For instance, a village called Gugudu in Andhra Pradesh is predominantly Hindu, but Muharram rituals have been observed in full unity. Experts explain that even though Gugudu has rigid caste-based differences, during the days of Muharram, all classes and castes come together and remember the tragedy of Karbala and overlook their differences. Another example is the translation of Mullah Hussain Wais Kashifi's book, Rawdat al-Shohada, into Urdu by a Hindu writer. This religious harmony was a gift from Qutb Shahi dynasty. Non-Muslims, particularly Hindus, had reservations in attending Muharram activities in a mosque, as they had their differences with local Muslims. In response to this, the Qutb Shahi dynasty established the Ashur Khanas, also known as Imam Baras, which was built to accommodate non-Muslim groups who were allowed to participate in Muharram rituals in their own unique ways. Azadari witnessed a new peak under the rulership of the Nawabs of Awadh, the Talpur Mirs of Sindh, the rulers of Bengal, and Hyder Ali and the Tipu Sultan family of Mysore. These rulers took Azadari to different parts of India and spread Muharram rituals vastly.
Shia dynasties in India, like in Awadh, Lucknow and the whole belt, and Hyderabad, because the Quli Qutb Shahis were Shias, and the Awadh state by, the Shia kings, Rajas or Nawabs, Asif ud-Dawla and others so the present format came during that time, probably 200-300 years back, where the Marsiya became, Mir Anis and other great poets. They established a new class of expression. I think the current format is the gift of probably Lucknow a few centuries ago.
In the great Ran of Kutch and Kathiawar, members of the Khoja community further promoted Azadari. Since many Khojas were businessmen and traders, they took Azadari with them wherever they travelled, such as Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Oman, Hong Kong, and Aden. The history of Azadari in the Indian subcontinent is incomplete without mentioning the preachers who spread the message of Islam and the teachings of Imam Ali. These preachers travelled from Turkey, Persia, and Arab countries to Sindh, Delhi, and to other parts of the region. What makes Muharram of the Indian subcontinent different from other regions of the world is its religious plurality and harmony. We don't have such examples where people from different faiths come together and express their solidarity with Imam Hussein through mourning and lamentation. The Safavid Empire and dynasties in the Indian subcontinent did not only protect Azadari, but gave it a new form and meaning. In the years that followed, Azadari would witness different cultural assimilations, specifically in Iran and the Indian subcontinent. In the next part of this documentary, we will explore the cultural and contemporary forms of Azadari.